Does archaeology confirm the biblical record? Does it confirm the historicity of the events told in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament? Now, if you go on Google this, you'll get many Christian websites assuring you that archaeology confirms the Bible. It proves that the Bible is reliable, historically accurate, and there's plenty of physical evidence to prove the Bible's claim that it is the word of God and completely trustworthy and inerrant, in fact. It's this claim I want to look at, not in a desire to be anti-Christian, but out of a simple desire to establish the facts, because the facts are out there. And I want to refer to two writers. One, a very distinguished Christian biblical scholar, Raymond, and I'll just read briefly from him. But first, I want to just refer to Bart Ehrman in his fantastic publication, The Bible, a historical and literary introduction, published by Oxford University Press. If you want a really good basic introduction to the whole of the Bible from an academic point of view, you couldn't do much better than this. It's very readable, it's got lots of lovely pictures in, and it's user-friendly in a way that often these introductory texts are not usually that friendly to read in my experience. Often quite dry and boring, but this is not. This is actually very readable. So I'm going to, what Bart Ehrman does actually, he sums up the evidence for the claims of the historicity of the Bible, particularly with regards to one incident, and that is the conquest of Canaan. Now Moses, as we know, never quite got there. At the end of the Torah, he dies, and he never quite gets into the promised land for various reasons. So Joshua is the man who gets sent in there. And the first big city that he conquers at the direction of God is, of course, Jericho, the famous city of Jericho, which I think is the longest continuously inhabited city on earth, actually. It's been, people have lived there for thousands of years, obviously even up to today. Anyway, in the book of Joshua in the Old Testament, especially chapter 6, we can see how Jericho is taken by the Israelites under the command of God, under the direction of God, because he has very specific instructions about how to conquer the city without assaulting it directly by armed force. There's another way he does it. And the city is taken and it's destroyed. And just looking at my Bible, particularly chilling verse, it says, "Then they devoted to destruction by the edge of the sword all in the city, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys." So in other words, allegedly God commands the genocide of the whole city. Anything that breathes, babies, old people, women, whatever, are to be put to the sword, literally put to the sword. Anyway, but that's not the purpose of this video, to mention that. I do recommend you just read Joshua chapter 6, a fascinating story of how the city is taken by quite a supernatural way, really. And the walls come tumbling down and the Israelites go in and conquer the city for themselves. But I'm interested in the archaeology behind this, because archaeologists have looked at this in great detail in the modern world and have come to a conclusion. Did this really happen? Were the walls of Jericho destroyed by miraculous event? What is the evidence of archaeology? So I'll just read to you what Bart Ehrman summarizes as the evidence for your information. Then I'll read Raymond, who gives a Christian point of view, which doesn't come to a different conclusion, but has a slightly different take on it. Anyway, there is no story in the conquest narrative. This is where Israel goes into the so-called promised land, exterminates countless nations there, literally wipes them out, takes over their land and says, aha, it's our land now. We are the people of God. So there is no story in the conquest narrative more impressive than the battle of the invading Israelites against the mighty fortified city of Jericho, with its large population and massive protecting walls. Unfortunately, archaeologists who have excavated the site of Jericho have discovered that the description of the great battle, this is in Joshua 6 I mentioned, cannot be brought into harmony with the realities of history. In the story, the city of Jericho is so massive and powerful that the 40,000 Israelite warriors cannot simply attack it head on. God gives them a miraculous victory by devising a plan to cause the walls to fall, ruining the powerful fortifications and giving the invaders direct access to the large city and its many inhabitants. And as we know, it says in Joshua, they were all slaughtered, literally wiped out. The innocent, the elderly, as well as anyone else was just slaughtered, apart from one or two exceptions, Rahab the prostitute and her family. That's another story. Modern excavations have shown that the story is almost certainly a legend without historical basis. The first truly scientific archaeological examination of the site was undertaken by Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s. She was a British archaeologist, by the way, and her findings have been corroborated since. Archaeologists now know that there was indeed an inhabited site at ancient Jericho from prehistoric times, going back to the Neolithic period. The site was inhabited on and off periodically throughout history until today. But there was no walled city there, let alone a very large and heavily fortified city, at the end of the 13th century when the Battle of Jericho was allegedly taking place. At that time, Jericho was a sparsely populated little place, and there were no walls around the city at all. And the walls issue, as you read in the story, absolutely crucial. But there's no evidence the walls ever existed. Judging from the archaeological record, the biblical stories of Rahab the prostitute, the spies who scouted out the land, the attack of the Israelites, the miraculous fall of the walls, the slaughter of all the inhabitants, all of it appears to be the stuff of legend and not an account of real history as it actually happened. End quote. So that's Bart Ehrman's take on this. And I just want to share with you then another view by Raymond E. Brown, Responses to 101 Questions on the Bible. It's quite an old book here. Raymond Brown, an American guy, he was appointed by the Pope to the Roman Pontifical Biblical Commission, and with church approval he has served for many years on the Faith and Order Commission of the World Council of Churches. Time magazine once described him as probably the premier Catholic scholar in the United States, and he is the only person to have served as president of all three of these distinguished societies: the Catholic Biblical Association, the Society of Biblical Literature, and the Society of New Testament Studies. And these are the creme de la creme of scholarly associations. To be head of those is quite a distinction and quite an honour. Now, one of the questions he answers, the question being, what about archaeological discoveries? Don't they confirm the historicity of large parts of the Bible? He says archaeology gives a mixed picture. When it comes to confirming the exact historicity of a biblical event, archaeological finds have not had a uniform thrust. For instance, in the initial excavation of Jericho, the uncovering of walls violently destroyed confirmed for many the biblical account of Joshua's destruction of the walls. More recent techniques, however, have dated the immense destroyed walls to a period much earlier than Joshua and seem to indicate that Jericho was not even occupied at Joshua's time. Some sites mentioned in the biblical account of the invasion of Palestine by the Israelites have, under investigation, shown signs of destruction precisely at the period when most scholars would date the Exodus. Others have followed the pattern of Jericho in not providing proof of occupation at this time. The notion that archaeology proves the Bible right is inaccurate and misleading. Just repeat that. The notion, which is very popular with conservative Christians and believed by innocent believers in the pews who don't know any better, the notion that archaeology proves the Bible right, according to this most distinguished of Bible scholars, is inaccurate and misleading. Biblical criticism suggests that some stories that the excavators were hoping to verify were probably not simple history in the first place. So it is not surprising when what they recount has not been verified by archaeology. End quote. So in other words, to use Bart Ehrman's language, they were legends and never intended to be taken as what we would call historical truth. But we have read them as historically factual accounts when they never were written as such or thought to have been understood as such by anyone. So those are the two distinguished narrators who are telling us that the state of play about archaeology does not confirm much of the Old Testament. It's a bit better when it comes to the New Testament, but that's a different story. So I hope you found that of interest. I've tried to get a Christian expert on this, but Ehrman, of course, is now definitely not a Christian. But nevertheless, they're both distinguished scholars who are trying to communicate in an honest way the findings of contemporary research. Archaeology does not confirm much of the Bible, and we need to come to terms with the truth if we are to be honest with ourselves and our relationships with God as well. Until next time.